This video is brought to you by Asteroids. One will get us eventually. Spider-Man does whatever a spider can, and also what a man can, I guess. He's been the subject of countless comic books, video games, TV series, movies, and probably some shit mobile games. Pick a medium, and he's definitely been in it at some point if he isn't currently. Which makes sense, I mean he sells the most merch by far of all the comic book characters. That's followed by Batman, but it's not even close. But not all things Spider-Man see the light of day, as this video aims to discuss, as well as other topics like... Actually, no, that's pretty much it. But there is a Loot Crate giveaway at the end. Let's crack on, shall we? The Amazing Spider-Man is notable for a few things. Skateboarding, a weird suit that always looks like it's wet for some reason, being an unnecessary retread of a better film, great chemistry, watching an old man get shot, an even dumber sequel where you use vintage coins found in a calculator to find an underground lair inside a train carriage that your dad built, but above all else, being a series that's so bad in general that Sony were forced to lend its character back to Marvel. But actually, in actuality, these films existed as a jumping off point into a whole Spider-Man cinematic universe and also a direct sequel in The Amazing Spider-Man 3. Now, there's not much confirmation in terms of what we would have seen, but we do know that Sony was so confident in Part 2 that they set a 2016 release date for the next film before the previous film was released. Mark Webb was said to return as director, as would Andrew Garfield's Twilight hair, and Paul Giamatti stated that he'd be back. Rumors included the return of Gwen Stacy in clone form, perhaps kicking off a variation of the Clone Saga, and potentially even a Spider-Gwen series. The Green Man covered in moss and jagged garbage would also be back, and we'd see the introduction of both Eddie Brock and Cletus Cassidy. In fact, presumably, a lot of the unsolved mysteries from the Amazing Spider-Man series would have been resolved in Part 3, including what would have happened to all that sinister tech from the Oscorp villain origin basement. Who was that mysterious man in the hat? What was his problem? Would Felicity Jones's character go on to become Black Cat? Did the Rhino beat the shit out of Spider-Man? How did that movie end? Was Peter Parker's father alive, seeing as there was a deleted scene where he was? And why was this whole series built around the mystery of his parents in the first place? Does anybody care about that? But like I said, these unanswered questions that probably would have remained unanswered regardless, and various cameos, would act as a jumping off point to a cinematic universe that absolutely nobody thought was a good idea. You know, which is exciting. I'd love to get into all of it, but you know, it hardly seems like this is the time or the place. Actually, come to think of it, this is both the time and place. The Amazing Spider-Man universe was shelved for a number of reasons, but not for the reasons that it sounded like a terrible idea and Sony not having made a good Spider-Man film since 2004. The Sony email hack, though, resulted in embarrassment for the company, and The Amazing Spider-Man 2 didn't perform super well, either critically or commercially, so all these wonderful ideas I'm about to outline would fail to see the light of day. One included a Venom solo movie, a Sinister Six film that focuses on the villains, which is said to be still happening apparently, and an Aunt May prequel that centered on her years as a super secret sexy spy working for S.H.I.E.L.D. or some variation of S.H.I.E.L.D. because Sony doesn't have the rights to S.H.I.E.L.D. Even Sally Field though was like, nah, don't do that. That sounds shit. Sony denied, though, that this movie was even being considered, even though it was said that it was being considered in the leaked emails. I don't know who to believe. I mean, the emails, obviously. But let's do a video game one. There are so many good Spider-Man video games. Too many to name. And by that I mean probably about 5. I don't know, I haven't played them all. One that I thought was okay, better than a lot of the reviews indicated, was Spider-Man Web of Shadows. That initially had a follow-up that went into production for release around 2010-ish. Unfortunately, its developer, Shaba Games, went under in 2009, but a number of concepts have made their way online. Titled Spider-Man Classic, that's how we say classic in Australia, that's not true. It would have featured a feast, a fiesta, a fjord of classic villainry as the game aimed to tell a best-of anthology story with a focus on boss battles with panel-by-panel faithfulness to the original comics. Some notable inclusions of note that would have been included were Carnage, Sim Vulture, Black Cat's Cleavage, and Mysterio, who was planned to be made into this incredibly menacing villain, but with a lot of the time the character not being actually present, with him just using special effects and trickery to give Spider-Man a real bloody runaround. However, when the curtain was pulled back and the real Mysterio was revealed, Spider-Man could just beat him up, you know, because he's just a guy with an inverted fishbowl on his head. Beenox actually took over the project and developed it into Shattered Dimensions, with the Mysterio design actually being left intact. Now we got a couple more additional pieces of info. Moon Knight would appear, and Wolverine was said to be a playable character in his classic grey suit, blackface costume that we all know and love from the comics. That is, of course, assuming he recovered from what Spider-Man did to him in the previous game. Let's do another video game. In the mid-2000s, EA Chicago began working on a title simply referred to as Marvel, with the rumored name actually being Marvel: Destruction. Though not strictly a Spider-Man game, the character did feature heavily, which is why I'm including this. Also, I decided on doing 5 properties before I could even be sure that I could find 5. Some would say that's unwise, but I would say it's one of the bravest things that a person has ever done. The idea was to take a bunch of Marvel's most classic and iconic characters, especially Spider-Man, probably, and pit them against one another in a third-person, beat-up-the-other-person game. Characters that were said to appear were definitely Spider-Man. I mean, he's practically the main character. Captain America, Hulk, Wolverine, Dark Phoenix, Doctor Doom, US Agent, Juggernaut, Venom, and others probably. The idea was to redesign these characters from scratch and make them more grounded, or realistic, or as Marvel themselves called them, worse. EA Chicago was told, nah, don't worry about it. Marvel will bloody love these new, fresh, weird ideas that you have. But that wasn't true at all. And the first lot of concepts were scrapped, which included a Spider-Man so skinny that he was deemed to look anorexic, and a version of the Hulk who just looked like a kind of a big fat fella. What Marvel did love though was the voice work, including that of Dave Faustino, who you might know as Bud Bundy from Married with Children, that is if you grew up in the late 80s and 90s. If you didn't just imagine a classic 90s sitcom, except everyone's a prick to one another and there's an insane amount of sexual innuendo, with all the subtlety of something with absolutely 0% innuendo.
Some sex tonight, pig?
Originally, the environments were to be completely destructible, including buildings, but this was scaled back down to street signs and cars and the like. Also, they played around with the idea of having arenas as big as 5 blocks, but the developers quickly found that with distances like that, it took some effort to keep the characters near one another, so that was reduced. The public was also at first to play a big part. If you just went total reckless destruction, the police would shoot at you and regular people would attack. But if you saved civilians, the city had your back. Much like Spider-Man the movie and also Spider-Man 2 the movie.
Whoa, watch out!
Yes, Spider-Man, watch out! Listen to the old man with his invaluable advice in this time of great need. I mean, I bet he's stopped so many trains in his time with his super strength. Look at this guy, what a dickhead. The public interference part was dropped, and there was also a problem surrounding what kind of narrative the game would be built around. There was talk of maybe making it a variation on Planet Hulk, or it might have been World War Hulk. I don't know, I don't have it in front of me. Or the Skrull invasion. But that was nixed, and they opted to structure the whole thing like a classic arcade fighter. Like Street Fighter, but not the latest one where Capcom released an unfinished game and charged full price for it, like that's something totally okay, which it isn't. I'd be so mad if I was a fan and had bought any of the street fighting games. Man, I'd probably say something on Twitter. Really let people know that, I'm taking a stand. That this middling YouTuber with very little reach or influence, he was not happy about the thing that we're talking about. Unfortunately, like Street Fighter V, the game was never finished. It went over budget and behind schedule, and for some reason EA were anxious to rid themselves of the Marvel license because they're dummies, I guess. So the game was shelved and the Marvel rights went to Sega, who made a bunch of crap and then a pretty alright Captain America game. You ever play that one? It's not bad. It's got the Arkham combat. It's pretty good. Finally, we can hardly talk about cancelled Spider-Man properties without bringing up what could have been in The Amazing Spider-Man 3, which we did already talk about, so let's get into Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 4. Despite the critical panning Spider-Man 3 received, because it turned out pretty shit, Sony was like, hey, that made money. Let's help Sam Raimi move forward with another one. And Raimi was hoping to make the best Spider-Man film ever due to his unhappiness with how the previous film turned out. The movie went through a number of script alterations between 2008 and 2010, but ultimately, Raimi decided that he couldn't meet the 2011 release date whilst at the same time upholding the film's creativity. So he gave Sony his blessing to go ahead with the reboot that he knew they were already planning as backup, and they parted amicably, as friends. I bet sometimes they see each other on Facebook with other people and go, good for them. There are though some story details that have been unveiled recently. Anne Hathaway was in negotiations to play Felicia Hardy as Black Cat. However, there were rumors, that of which Raimi denied, that she was to become a new villain called the Vultress. Dylan Baker would have also finally been given the opportunity to transform into the Lizard, which was Raimi's intention all along. That idea though flowed over into The Amazing Spider-Man. Bruce Campbell, who had a cameo in all the other films, was to become Mysterio. I'm not sure if that means all these characters were the same guy. That would have been pretty cool, but the movie would have depicted him as a minor villain Spider-Man drops off at the police station at the start of the film. In fact, the opening of the movie was to feature a montage of Spider-Man making short work of a number of villains, including the Shocker, the Prowler, and Rhino. I don't know why I said it like that. The Vulture was to become the main villain, with it said that John Malkovich would take on the role. There has been some concept art released of their aerial battle, which I will now reveal for your viewing pleasure, bolstered by the most dramatic music I could find in fairly short notice. All in all, despite Raimi being deeply unhappy with it, I'd probably have preferred to see a continuation of his series other than the reboot that we got. That being said, after part 3, the whole thing did kind of feel done. Not really though, in a particularly satisfying way. Still, I personally would have loved to have seen what other kind of funny faces they could have got Tobey Maguire to pull for the sequel. Regardless, I'm still hoping for a Spider-Verse movie featuring all the live-action Spider people and more. I made a video on that if you're keen. I'll link it below. How exciting. But you know what bloody else is exciting? This person here winning this week's Loot Crate. If you are this person, just private message me your details on my channel and I'll sort it out. And if you want to win next week's box, just leave any comment you want below. Maybe you could be like one of the literal thousands of people who type some variation on any comment, or perhaps even make mention if you'd have liked to have seen any of these cancelled Spider-Man properties become a reality. Also, just before I go, I have a podcast called The Weekly Planet. That's linked below. It's out every Monday. Or if you want, check out that video there where I just kick The Walking Dead for 10 or so minutes for being, a pretty garbage show. But regardless, thanks for watching this video. I appreciate it. Take care.